One man is growing old and one man is being told that his land is not his own now. He has no place called home. He must learn to be and grow and find time to feed his soul. When he learns to be alone, he will find that he is whole. Gonna break free tonight. Gonna take these chains, gonna make it through the night.
Former intelligence officer, Sergeant William Kotel. He is a U.S. retired Army Sergeant, and he was one of the people that I mentioned in the recent series. And I told you that Flynn had come up against him. I told you that we had done some interviews that were very important about in 2020, when everything went down. And he was at the forefront of filing an investigation into what was going on in New York, as well as our conversations that were very in-depth about Benghazi. So please welcome back Sergeant William Kotel. William, it's nice to have you here with us again.
Thank you very much.
So William, you have not stepped back and retired. As much as I say you are a retired U.S. intelligence agent, no, in fact, you've been busy and you've been filing. And so we're here today to talk about your most recent filing and then how that factors into the previous filings that you've done and why that's so important, because you filed in right after the Afghanistan withdrawal. You filed in to President Trump regarding New York City at the time of the big C word. So what is happening right now, and why is it that you're filing in about Venezuela?
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Venezuela is a problem. About 6 weeks after Russia invaded the Ukraine, Nicolas Maduro, who's not the leader of Venezuela and is there by force, came out with threats on media and radio and even in print regarding attacking and supporting Russia and attacking the United States with force. When he mentioned those comments, that is an act of aggression, which means that we have the right to respond. And as a result, when you look at the steady state of Venezuela, since 2017 to current day, there are 7.1 million refugees that have fled Venezuela, inundating South and Central America and moving north to the US. And this is one of the primary causes of our immigration crisis on the border. Second, Nicolas Maduro is head of the Sun Cartel and has welcomed many other drug cartels into Venezuela for freedom of movement and operations. This is a big deal. And obviously everybody's heard about fentanyl, which is another problem. And of course, human trafficking from cartels. Third, Nicolas Maduro has invited Russia, China, and Iran into his country to operate. For those of you that don't know, Venezuela is the highest oil producing country in South and Central America. Now they've got access to that oil. Nicolas Maduro used 70% of the gold bullion backing Venezuelan currency to bribe Russia when President Trump was in office, and he put out a $15 million bounty on Maduro's head. Obviously, you know, Juan Guaido is supposed to be the lawfully elected leader of Venezuela, but can't get into his own country. He's currently in Colombia, and it's created huge problems. In addition, you have terrorist groups. You have everything from ISIS and Hezbollah, which are Sunni and Shia groups that are operating in Venezuela with freedom of movement. And so we all remember Nicolas Maduro also created humanitarian crisis. He was killing people wholesale to maintain power, moving their bodies to, refineries and factories to process the bodies out so they wouldn't be caught by human rights commissions. But so many people left and inundated other South and Central American countries and had video of this and told people about this, and nothing has been really done. We've lost complete touch with South and Central America. To make matters worse, Cuba's been emboldened, and now they've become more iron-fisted. And Nicaragua has recently arrested an archbishop from the Catholic Church and 221 other Catholics who refused to leave the country based off of Maduro pushing the current Nicaraguan government, and they've been sentenced to 26 years in prison. As a matter of fact, the Pope spoke out about this right after the incident. So there's a litany of reasons to go and conduct a police action, which is what my mandamus is about, to arrest Maduro, warning Russia, China, Iran, and other foreign nationals to leave. And then we go and conduct an arrest of him and his henchmen. They have to be brought to justice. And just so you're clear, 7.1 million refugees leaving Venezuela, inundating all these other South and Central American countries, have now put this huge strain onto every country who's pushing them north toward the United States, along with their undesirables, so to speak, and cartels getting payment from people, pushing them north. Venezuelans are exempt from Title 42, so are Cubans, and so are Haitians, and so are Middle Easterners from certain countries like Syria and Yemen. So this has really been the crux of a lot of problems for the United States, from everything from the drugs cartel, the fentanyl, the refugees, the immigration crisis, along with major adversaries and threats to the United States national security from that country. This is actually a start of a making of another 9/11. They've also emboldened so many South and Central American countries, and they're all against the United States because we really haven't done anything to help them. And that is why I did the mandamus. So let me back up and talk about what happened in the beginning. After the initial 6 weeks, and then Maduro made the threats, I communicated with congressmen, senators, talking to Ted Cruz, Rubio, Rick Scott from Florida. I contacted Kathy Castor, Congressman Green from Tennessee, Congressman Green from Georgia, Congressman Waltz, but just a whole litany of them. I also contacted another guy, I won't mention his name, but he's on the U.S. Delegation to the UN. He's on the United Nations Security Council, and provided him this information. Shortly after I provided him the information, he contacted me, screamed and yelled, and shut it down immediately. And this was about a year ago. So when you take all this into account, and me bringing all this forward, and to continue to say that this is the main problem we're facing, it's right here in our hemisphere, and no one's taking any action or taking it seriously, that is why I conducted my mandamus. Now, when Afghanistan withdrew, the day before our troops were killed, I had conducted Inspector General complaints to the Department of Defense and to the Department of State. I did so saying it was unlawful to basically remove our troops from that country in the manner they were doing it. Not only was it unsafe, but they were leaving U.S. persons and all our military equipment. We're talking weapons, sensitive items, classified material, aircraft, vehicles, clothing, body armor, night vision, you name it. This was completely unlawful. It was unlawful for President Biden to attach a deadline date of 31 August to remove ourselves. And that was under U.S. Code 15, the APA 2031, and there's more. So I attached this mandamus that I did after I was shut down, because when I did the IG complaints, the very same day they shut me down, the next day, 13 of our soldiers were killed by a bombing by an ISIS and Al-Qaeda, HVT-1 and HVT-9. They were seen outside the gates the day before the bombing. And that mandamus that I did back then, after I was shut down by everybody, the IGs and all that, was sent to the Supreme Court of the United States, which was blocked, again, by a woman by the name of Lisa Nesbitt, who's in the review section of the Supreme Court. I submit the documents. She sent back for corrections. They were corrected. It was submitted back. She told me on the phone in no uncertain terms I had to file with a different court, and then she claimed she never said that, and she hung up on me. And it still is sitting in a limbo land in the Supreme Court. So it hasn't gone forward. It hasn't come back to me, and it's not moving anywhere. So I attached that as part of this new mandamus I did against Venezuela to show what could happen from past events. And right now, every single event you can think of, from oil to immigrations to drugs and cartels to terrorist groups to foreign adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran, is all sitting in Venezuela. And that's why this is such a critical issue. It's like a tinderbox where people just dump gasoline on it and wait for the heat to cause it to spark. It's crazy.
But they don't even realize that, for example, Russia's involved down there.
People do realize it. It's all over the news. It's all over the news.
We aren't doing anything about that. We aren't
Well,
we aren't stepping in to change anything about that. Now, first of all, let me go back to a point that you made early on in this, and then we'll continue. Why are
yes,
these people immune coming across the border from all these different countries? What gives them that immunity?
Department of State has deemed that any country that's under threat of loss of life is allowed to be exempt from Title 42. Venezuela is one of those countries. Cuba is another. Syria, Yemen, anywhere where you can't go back home because you face persecution or death, they're exempt from Title 42. To be exempt from Title 42 means that this administration is well aware that that country is completely unsafe for its own people, let alone others. I mean, it's kind of a catch-22 for them, because on one hand, they're saying, we're doing stuff, and on the other, they're not. And I'd like to bring up one other point, if I might.
Please.
Last year, when I asked this administration and others to go after Maduro, and they shut me down, saying they were more worried about Taiwan and China invading them, that very week, the State Department sent a delegation down to talk to Maduro. And I had to do an emergency inspector general complaint, but it was too late. They already talked to him on a Saturday. The New York Post actually leaked it. And why that's so significant is because this administration just went down and dealt with a tyrant who's not lawfully elected. Juan Guaido is the president. So that following Monday, the State Department came out with an apology to the press, and you can look this up in media if you like, saying, we're sorry we dealt with Maduro. We're dealing with actually Guaido. We understand that Maduro is not lawfully elected, but they're still dealing with him to this day. Now, Venezuela was holding 9 U.S. persons hostage for many years, okay? And the State Department was able to get their release. Most of them were oil executives. 2 of them were prior service that worked for a company called Silvercore, helping to get Guaido and his people back in 2019, 2020. And then they got exposed because they didn't have any operational security. But this goes back to a much bigger picture. Why is this administration dealing with Maduro? I mean,
Right.
the man is murdered.
Well,
Hundreds
first
of
of all,
thousands of his own people.
in a brutal way that would be like genocide, essentially. But also, he's not only getting away with genocide, but from what I understand, it's a country that's rich in gold, and a lot of that gold was supposed to be banked over in London, and quite a bit of that gold was then stolen from Venezuela out of London, or maybe transshipped somewhere else. And so you're kind of tying together the players that are involved in backing some of that strange behavior. And where did the gold go? There's another question. But also, why are we dealing with cartel, and why are we allowing that when we're basically having a war on drugs?
Great. Another catch-22, or another, hypocritical kind of matter that's going on. But you talk about the gold. If you look at our situation, we're back in Ukraine. So is Europe and NATO, okay? Russia is the one that's in Ukraine right now, taking heavy losses. They're being backed by China and Iran and North Korea. How odd is it that Venezuela is hosting all 3 of those countries, Russia, China, and Iran, down in their country, allowing China access to their oil, paying the gold from the Venezuelan economy and country to Russia.
Right.
You see, so we have an active threat down there in Venezuela, and there's a lot more that's more detailed. This is all unclassified material. It's all open sourced. So we have some real concerns. There's even open source concerns about a weapons of mass destruction program going on down there, as Venezuela used to be a host to the nuclear accords under George Bush Sr. and Russia to destroy excess nuclear weapons. So it's kind of interesting how that's in our hemisphere in a very short distance from us, and that Nicaragua and Cuba have been, influenced by Venezuela, kind of like emboldened, and they're doing even worse than they were before. Most of these countries have no faith in us. And right now, Brazil has no confidence in their president. And that's another problem, because they're a topsy-turvy country right now, not knowing which way they'll go. And we don't have many allies. And Mexico obviously is just hosting all these immigrants on the border waiting for Title 42 to lift so they could flood it. It's like you're seeing all these immigrants that are refugees from Venezuela with good cause getting shoved through all these countries, pushed to Mexico and on the border. And the cartels are taking full advantage of this, shoving as many as they can in the United States. And now they're waiting to do, us in a harmful way, but none of these countries can really host that many refugees. There's no way. The UN's not doing much, and the United States definitely isn't doing much down there to support them financially or monetarily. Colombia's had their fill with everything. They've even got an arrest warrant out for Guaido, who's staying in Colombia because he can't stay in Venezuela for financial crimes, which is another question. Yeah.
Well, excuse me, I don't
know,
mean to interrupt you, but the last time we spoke, you were also reporting on how ships were stationed from China and Russia down off of our coast. What's the latest on all that?
Well, I don't know the current status, steady rate or steady state of what they're doing right now as far as shipping goes. I know they have civilian and military ships in Venezuela, docked in Venezuela, which is right next to Colombia. So you got to believe that's making all those countries surrounding Venezuela extremely nervous. And then we have the Panama Canal to be concerned with. That's a big deal. This is something that really needs to be addressed. And I'd like to call your attention to a Middle Eastern example, if I could, of what this looks like right now. Is that all right?
Yes, please. In fact, when we spoke before, we did these interviews about Benghazi and all that, and you were there, you were central to that entire play out at the time. So maybe you can give us more of a bigger picture, the macro and the micro, as to how that factors into now. You were present at that time, and so what's that saying to our world right now in what you're filing?
Well, if we go back to facts and we look at the macro picture, the larger scale picture, okay, and we go back to 2011, 2012, there were many things happening in the Middle East under President Obama that were problematic. President Obama was up for re-election in 2012, if you remember. And during that 2011, 2012 stint, Obama had issued the orders to have bin Laden killed, the head of al-Qaeda, which happened. Once bin Laden was killed, the White House issued a decree that Central Command can no longer report on attacks by Sunnis or al-Qaeda, that al-Qaeda was dead, it was decimated. That was to help President Obama regain his presidency, okay? At the same time, General Lloyd Austin was in charge of all forces in Iraq. And he was told to pull out of there, and he was given his 4th star and given command of CENTCOM. During that pullout time, General Austin left over $8 billion in equipment. So when you go back to video clips of ISIS from 2011, 2012, which is al-Qaeda, and 2013, which is ISIS, you'll see all of our equipment being worn by them. Same pattern of misconduct took place in Afghanistan in 2021.
I follow. I see what you're saying. This is almost a pattern of operation.
Correct. So now, if we look at the stability of the Middle East, under Obama, most of the Middle East turned to Shia, which is Iranian-backed. Iraq pushed out all the Sunnis from the government, from the military, from police, national and local police. And Syria was under a big conflict, and Assad was being backed by Iran and Russia, which was pushing out smaller groups, which were Sunni-led groups. At the time, I was doing a case, I won't get into that because that's long, but that case revolved around a specific Sunni named Rafi Asawi, a former minister of finance, to try to get him back in and quell some of the violence. Because 14 Middle Eastern countries that are Sunni dominant protested all of this behavior by Iran and all these countries. Well, next thing you know, in Egypt, Hosni Mubarak was replaced by Mr. Morsi, who's the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, another Shia stronghold. And now the Suez Canal over there was in jeopardy. And Yemen destabilized. And these Houthi rebels, which are Shia and Iranian-backed, went into Yemen to try to take the country. And even to this day, Saudi Arabia is in an active conflict to defend the Yemenis government against the Houthi rebels and Iran. So when you think back to last year when President Biden talked about, well, we can't get the Saudis to give us any oil, and the media finally reported saying that the Saudis won't give us any oil, it's obvious why they won't, because we're supporting Iran. we're supporting the destabilization of the entire Middle East being overrun by Shia and Iranian backed, and then the Russians are backing them as well. So we've lost control of all the Middle East. Everything, every gain we ever had is gone from that time period. The Libya crisis in North Africa and other areas, the Benghazi event had nothing to do with Iran. The Benghazi event was a self-inflicted wounds by what was happening. Ambassador Stevens was about to blow the whistle on stuff that was going wrong, and all of a sudden he's killed with a minor security force, and nobody went to the rescue. Very odd, and that's not how we do things. We could be anywhere in the world in 24 hours or less with hit teams, no problem. Why all of a sudden is Benghazi so different? So you really have to see the bigger picture on that and drill down to the smaller picture as you go, how it impacted each and every country. And if you translate that to South and Central America, in our hemisphere, you're having the same effect with Venezuela being left unchecked, supporting our adversaries, supporting criminal and terrorist groups, and supporting illegal and illicit activity and murders. And we're doing nothing about it. We have no control over that. And as you can see, the crisis at the border is beyond out of control. And it's just going to get worse if we don't do anything about Venezuela. So the Middle
What do you
East
think
is our
should be
historical
done?
past.
That's a good point. What do you think could be done for our border based on your experience?
Pretty simple. If we go after Maduro in a police action to arrest and remove him, okay, and we put Guaido in charge and let them conduct their own special elections, there's a woman by the name of Maria Machado down there. She's not part of the People's Will Party, which is a communist party, and others that in the parliament want to support stuff, get rid of the Supreme Court head that's, you know, one of Maduro's henchmen. If we can do that, then we can start sending Venezuelans back home. And a lot of them want to go home. And that would stop a lot of the push coming from South and Central America north to our border. That's
So what's
the surest way to fix at least a good portion of our problem.
now you did this filing, and you basically also referred back to your filing about Afghanistan, yes? And then
Yes, I did.
and so in this filing, they basically rejected it. The court rejected it, saying that it wasn't something they could accept to consider. Is that right?
Yeah, apparently a Judge Thomas Barber, I've never met him or seen him, received the filing on one day, and the very next day issued dismissal before the White House even responded to my green notice and packet I sent them. And he basically shows that he's scared of the administration and he wants nothing to do with, you know, getting involved with the executive branch of government not doing its job. I mean, that's the only way I can put it. I think that my point is out there. And if something does happen now, this judge ought to be ashamed. But again, he has a right to do this. I'm not going to lie. He does have a right to deny the case based on the fact that I'm asking him to order them to do their job. You know,
Right.
he can have that and say that there's many other venues for that, many other places to go. But as you've heard, I've gone to congressmen, senators, I've gone to, you know, inspector generals, I've gone to, you know, Office of Professional Management, Office of Management Budget, you know, I've gone to Department of Defense, Department of State. None of them are responding or doing their jobs. And most of these politicians today give more lip service than anything else. You know, they want to say Afghanistan this, Afghanistan that, but do nothing. You know, this is indicative of the times we have a real problem. The United States is on a very bad precipice.
Where do you think we're headed? Like what could happen?
Well, right now I'm more optimistic than I was, and I'll give you an example that's not probably what no one wants to hear, but if you look at this Budweiser commercial thing that went down with this transgender guy or whatever it was, right? People in the United States, about 99.5% of the people in the United States are normal citizens. That 0.5% represents all these lunatics, whack jobs, these weird groups, and these other people that are criminals and other elements, okay? And they all get media time. So it looks to the regular American person like, my God, the media is showing this is the way it is, so everybody's got to comply. I don't want to say anything. However, now they know they have a little bit of a voice. The Budweiser commercial is a good example because what it did is it showed how many people went against Budweiser for pulling that stunt on that commercial. They lost $6 billion in revenue in 1 week. So when people are pushed into a situation they know they can control, they can control the situation. That's what they do. So they basically shut Budweiser down for making such an obsidious ad like they did. They didn't agree with it for whatever the reasons are and what have you. That's a good trend. That shows that people want to get involved. The problem is a lot of people don't know how to get involved. If you talk to your congressman or senator's office and they blow you off, which they most likely will, local politicians or governors, and they blow you off, and they most likely will. The point is that the more people that send the same type of information, the less likely it is that these people in authority can ignore you. And everybody has access to an inspector general's office of any branch of government you want. And these inspector generals, when they receive a report by law, they have to do a report, file it, and it must stay on file for at least 2 years. So people do have a way to voice their opinions, to say that I'm really fed up with this, but they didn't get the information on how to do it or why. And that's why I like telling people you can go and you can write these inspector generals, you can write your congressmen and senators, even though you may feel like you're blown off. If you and 10 other your friends do it, and those 10 friends do it, and keep doing it, there's no way anyone can ignore you. It's not possible. So you're really going to set the standard. And this Budweiser commercial was the first step that a large group of Americans stood up and said, we've had enough. And they knew they could control what they drink. Okay. I mean, I know that sounds petty, but it's true. But they can translate that into what's going on with the border, immigration, drugs, Venezuela, whatever they choose to.
Well, I think that's really an important point. I'm very interested in seeing and calling forward some of the quantum folks that listen to these broadcasts and have certainly tuned in about the series that I just dropped prior to this conversation. Maybe somebody's willing to help reword your entire research and all of your filings, to file them in or help you file them in a way that would be heard, and see how that goes, because I know many people are out there are filing amicuses on behaviors. And this, what you just said a minute ago, would be a perfect example of how people could direct that to all the different heads of state and force them to take a look at this, take a look at what you're saying, and not bury it as to, well, we'll get to that later. Well, there may not be a later. It seems to me that what you're saying is there's an alarm bell that's ringing and it's below us currently. And I want to ask you, William, what is the gameplay? I guess that's the best way to say it. What's the gameplay from your perspective of the Middle East coming this direction through South America? Or is it China? What's the next maneuver?
Well, I mean, the Middle East has cut us off from oil. That's what they've done. Biden wanted to shut down, domestic production of oil. And now Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and others are saying we're not going to sponsor or provide any to the United States because we're supporting, Shia and rebels and Iran. And they have a right to say that, the next step, who knows what the next step could be? It's probably going to be individual onesie and twosies. Governor Abbott's got a big problem down there. The problem with the U.S. government and Governor Abbott right now is when you catch one terrorist crossing the border, you can request the federal government shut down that border and all crossings at that time. And they could say, well, it was a one-off. But when you have 50 to 100, because anything over 3 is considered a clear and present danger, they have to shut the border down. And that's something Governor Abbott's people haven't gotten done. I mean, he's spending money on his own National Guard and his own law enforcement, and they're inundating towns. But he, under the federal law dealing with terrorism, has the right to shut the border down after 3 or more terrorists are caught within 1 calendar year, or even 1 calendar month.
Excuse me. Why do you think he's not doing that?
It's
evident if he's willing. His volition is strange, because if he's willing to send busloads of people to make a point, why not just shut it down, and then you don't have to send busloads of people to another city to make a point?
I don't know. I've contacted Governor Abbott's office many times, talked to his constituents and others, and nobody wants to respond. Just like Governor DeSantis' office, the same thing. It doesn't matter. Like I said, these people are in these sheltered ivory towers. They have these aides and these staff members that are like layers of onions. They don't allow for the information to get across. I mean, I've sponsored, hell, I got Congressman Mark Green out of Tennessee elected to freaking Congress, and the guy won't even call me back or talk to me since he's been up in that office. This is an ex 168th Tactical SOAR Army guy that's now a doctor. You know, there's other congressmen that refuse to do it. I mean, I was told by a retired Navy captain who works for a Republican congressman in Florida that if I don't get paid for what I'm doing, I shouldn't be doing it. And
Wow.
that is the most abhorrent message I have ever heard from anybody that ever held office in uniform. I can't tell you how sickening that is. I get nothing for what I do. I get zero. And I don't care. It's not the thing about me. It's about, look at the soldiers, the veterans. How many have gone through all these nightmares? How many have died? And we're just supposed to sit back and allow this government to walk all over us. So I've taken what actions I can at my own level. You know, I did an exceptional document to the Supreme Court, and I did a partially good document to this local federal court to say, I've had enough. I'm warning you. And like I put in my line item 13, you know, I'm not line item 13, but I put down that petitioner prays that the courts hear the following matters. If the information was available prior to 9/11, we could have averted that tragedy.
That's
That
right.
befell the United States 22 years ago. As of this date, the facts are, you know, there's all of this stuff going on in Venezuela. I mean, you're watching a prelude to something catastrophic happening. Do I think it's large scale military is moving in? No, of course not. Do I think it's an invasion by air? No. It's going to be onesie and twosie carrying, you know, a lot of explosives or whatever coming in here and hitting key targets. So it's either going to be one mass casualty producing event or a multitude of attacks that are going to create mass casualties around the country. And they have the apparatus. Let's not forget, from Afghanistan, we took 124,000 people, of which we only had 20,000 vetted, and we left a whole bunch of U.S. citizens behind. I don't know how that worked out, but I'm sure that the general from CENTCOM was so happy with himself. He patted himself on the back like 80 times. I can't believe we got so many guys in the United States. Nobody was vetted, and you left U.S. citizens back there. What are you happy about? I don't understand. You know, so maybe I'm lost, maybe I'm retarded, but I don't get it, you know. But I think that's the wrong answer. And I know for a fact that under the law, that was definitely something that's a chargeable offense.
Well, let me read out loud what it says here on your mandamus. I'm going to read number 13 and then the petitioner's plea. So it says here, Venezuela is the leading producer of oil in the American hemisphere, and much of the oil is going to China, an adversary of the United States, as well as being used as a bargaining chip to deal unlawfully with its current administration. Deals for oil do not negate human rights violations or criminal conduct. Further deals don't negate the responsibilities to protect and defend the United States. And you made an exhibit as well as giving a link there.
Correct.
The petitioner's plea. I want to read this because I think this is particularly important. And then we'll get into it. The petitioner prays the court hears the following matters. If the information was available prior to 9/11, we could have averted the tragedy that befell the United States 22 years ago. As of this date, the facts are the following. Number one, over 100 terrorists have been caught at the U.S. border, ISIS, Hezbollah, and more. 50 U.S. Code 21-restraint, regulation, and removal -invasion, 18 U.S. Code 1505. Obstruction of proceedings before departments, agencies, and committees. Number two, China has increased spying activity and secret police action on U.S. soil. Where, William? Where?
In New York City, they busted this Chinese company that was actually PRK, Chinese police. Yeah, they were absconding with Chinese civilians to try to force them to follow the guidance of the current communist regime in China.
Well, when we spoke about Benghazi, I had mentioned to you that I had done a series up in Lake Placid on the Olympic athletes. And at the time, people were asking me when I was there doing the interviews if I knew of the Jeff Bezos of China that had just moved into the Adirondacks. And turns out that was the head CEO of Alibaba, who bought the old Rockefeller estate up there and put in a runway apparently for his own jet, so they said. And then fast forward in time, I learned of another former general in the Chinese ranks there in the Communist Party who bought quite a bit of land in Texas and was said to build a windmill farm, but in fact, he also put in a runway that would be able to support very large jets coming and going. And so that's a curious.
Well, I can tell you that in the
event.
state of Florida, a Chinese general and his staff attempted to buy 1,400 acres of farmland in Sumter County area of Florida. And his whole goal was to build a bio lab there. And I went nuts writing to Governor DeSantis and to all the congressmen and senators. I went through the AG's office, the attorney general, to put a stop to it. And so did some others. And they finally blocked it. But how can a Chinese Communist Army general, active duty general, purchase property on U.S. sovereign soil? And then what in God's name would he be doing with a biolab other than bringing some other variant strain of COVID or something god awful worse to release into the population? I mean,
what would that be? And it just begs a lot of questions. It's very strange activity for someone to buy the Rockefeller estate and then house up in the middle of the woods. It's just it's an odd place for someone to randomly go. It's not, I mean,
it is.
Maybe he likes peace and quiet in the forest, but it is strange. So number 3 on the petitioner's plea, Maduro has made open threats against the United States and conspired with Russia, China, and Iran. Now, when you and I talked with General Vallée on the interviews, at the last interview I did with him, he was very worried at the time because apparently Iran had set off a satellite over us that had nuclear capability on it. So explain what you mean by number 3, is made open threats to the United States and conspired with Russia, China, and Iran.
It's what I talked about earlier. Maduro made open threats in public media forums after Russia invaded Ukraine to attack the United States with force. And he said he sided with Russia. And because he's got Russia, China, and Iran in there, you don't have a chance of destabilizing the actions in Ukraine while Russia and China have a presence in the American hemisphere, especially one where it controls the majority of oil in South and Central America. That is an oil producing country, and it is one of few that has the oil capabilities. Only we would surpass them, but we don't drill anymore thanks to President Biden. So now we have a serious issue because Venezuela, Russia, and China could shut that oil down and not give us access to it. And they exert their influence from all the way 8,000-9,000 miles away on the United States through Venezuela. So we're allowing this proxy country, this satellite country, to be an impediment in our side. And this country has done all the things I've listed and is being puppeteered by these larger first-rate countries like China and Russia, and of course Iran, which is not a first-rate, but it is second-rate country anyways. That's what I'm talking about. So Maduro thinks he can threaten us and do whatever he wants because he's got his mom and dad there from Russia and China.
And so number 4 is cartels have freedom of movement, causing increase in drugs and human trafficking. The ability to prevent any further harm to the United States and stop any mass casualty event is the duty of the executive branch. Please go into that.
Well, again, Maduro sponsors these cartels and these terrorist groups, and they're all somehow working together. They're using cartels to push human trafficking up and get money for it, but at the same time, they're smuggling in those terrorists with this human trafficking groups into the United States, and they're all profiting off this. And most of those refugees are what makes up the bulk of what the cartels are pushing forward. So they're taking advantage of Venezuelans again. So now they leave Venezuela because they'll be, thrown in jail or killed. They have no home left. Everything they had was taken. They get shoved into refugee camps in Colombia, shoved out of Colombia, moved further north. Cartels start picking them up, saying, "Hey, you want to get in the United States? Pay me." And then they got to pay them. And oh, by the way, you're going to take these 2 guys with you. They don't speak Spanish. They're Arabic speakers, or they're Chinese speakers, or German. I mean, this is what's been happening. This is exactly what's been happening. So when you look at that and you look at the fact that the COVID virus effectively shut everybody's ability to do anything down unlawfully, it's really hard to come back from that. It allowed even more freedom of movement for all bad guys. And, the governments aren't really getting involved with it. They're just making sure everybody's been locked down for so long. And then they start changing how we operate. Why is this administration so hell-bent on making sure the United States is destroyed? And that's exactly how this is viewed.
It
Economically?
certainly, yeah, it's looking that way, isn't it? Well, that was kind of something that seemed to be in the offing back when we talked about all the Benghazi things. It just seemed like a mimic play that was upcoming. And here we are. It's now here. So what do the people do? What can the people really do? You filed these things. They're tossing you out. What do you feel that the people can do most foremost to help?
People can just get on their computers and go on internet and websites for different congressmen, senators, for the government, any agency you want in the government. And you can file what you want to file. You can submit how you protest this or that, or this is unlawful. Get on social media and do the same thing, everything from Facebook to LinkedIn, and you keep espousing it and let your friends and family do the same. Do your IG complaints. If you want to get verbal or vocal and actually go out and physically do it, you can do it as well in public by, communicating with church groups, supermarket friends, who cares, mall people, it doesn't matter. I mean, you're able to go out there and speak on it if you choose to. But a lot of people get tired after working a hard day and they want to go home. So they can sit in front of their computer and do one a day, or they can copy and paste one complaint and submit it to, their governor and all these congressmen and senators that they want. They can just copy and paste these email addresses. And if they keep doing it and then they CC it to their friends and asking their friends to continue to do it, it makes so many voices come out that there's no way to ignore that. You see, your strength is in numbers with regular people. Strength is not in individuals that do things and then get told that their credibility is garbage or they're made to look like morons when they're not. Our laws are pretty specific. Since when was it the law to shut down all oil production in the United States? When was it the law to allow the economy to get tanked, or to owe China billions of dollars, or let China buy property in the United States? When was it the law to allow, the immigration crisis to go nuts so that everyone in Texas, Arizona, and California can feel the brunt of that, and these people could come in and rob their homes? When was it the law to have a criminal break in your house, try to kill you, and if you kill him, you go to jail? When was that the law? These are not laws the United States espouses to. So when is enough enough?
It's certainly not the law that you stood on to fight for. And when you were into the intelligence agency at CENTCOM, and you were over there in the theater that was kind of playing itself out, speaking to this very issue back here, you got out of that, you witnessed what you witnessed, you got out of that, and it brings me back to my point about Flynn. I mentioned in the series prior to this that Russell, J:*Gold had court-martialed Flynn on the Supreme Court, in the Supreme Court, actually. And where did that go? And Trump, I think, pardoned Flynn. Am I correct? And now, I brought it back around that you, William, had been thrown under the bus by Flynn. So could you please tell the audience a little bit more about that so they have the perspective of what that entailed?
All right, I'll give you a brief overview of it so I don't kill your audience. I'm sure this is my voice by now. But in 2007 in Iraq, there was a fire, and it was with the Central Bank of Iraq. The 12th to the 16th floors burnt up. The Minister of Finance, a Sunni named Rafi Asawi, had ordered the head of his PSD, Colonel Rad, to start the fire because the State Department was giving provincial reconstruction money in cash to the Iraqi government and using paper hand receipts and did not digitize it. In 2007,
Wow.
when they began to digitize how much money they had provided to the Iraqi government for provincial reconstruction, Colonel Rad ordered the fire. Rafi Asawi ordered the fire, and Colonel Rad did it. Now, after that, an investigation was done. All the files were burnt up. $12 billion US dollars was stolen. It was sent partially to Denmark. The rest of it was sent to banks in Brazil. When we brought Asawi to an Iraqi court in the IZ, the first of its kind at that time, in 2008, the State Department allowed us to prosecute Colonel Rad, but Rafi Asawi had to be let go because the Department of Treasury said they liked his macroeconomic policy. So he was let go. In 2009, I became a member of CENTCOM after doing a stint in Iraq with the 101st. And I had brought up the Asawi case, saying we need to go back after this guy, get our money, and get his ties to Al-Qaeda, because he knew a lot of Al-Qaeda at the time. Well, it took me 4 years to get it going. In that 4-year period, the former president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, also went to Iraq with Prime Minister Maliki, a Shia who runs Iraq, blessing, and took more than $400 million earmarked for provincial reconstruction. He also sent it to banks in Brazil. So what I advised everybody was that we're seeing a trend. Now you have Al-Qaeda/ISIS by Isawi, a Sunni, and Ahmadinejad sponsoring Hezbollah and groups like Shining Path, all in South and Central America, moving north toward the United States. And this took place in 2013 and 14. In 2015, right south of El Paso, Texas, ISIS flew flags with the Juarez Cartel within a mile of the fence line that separates the two. So you could see it was a pretty clear and present threat. Well, after the Treasury shut my case down after 4 years, I had it set up to where we were going to get him back in office. We had the ambassador on the line. We had freaking the interagency working group. Everybody was online. The Department of Treasury shut it down again. After we shut down, I was sent later to what's called a scripting conference in Suffolk, Virginia for 1 week. During that conference, I ran into General Flynn, who at that time was head of Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, and he was a 3-star. This is General Michael Flynn, so everyone knows. And he knew one of my contractors, and he asked me what I was doing. So I told him I'm retiring. And he asked me what are my regrets. So I told him about the Asawi case a little bit. And this is all unclassified stuff. I mean, this was all open source. But once I told him that, he asked me to send him emails on that because he wanted the money for his agency. So when I got back to CENTCOM, I sent him 2 emails regarding this that were very brief on the JWIC's top secret. After that was done, 3 days later, I got called in by my command and they screamed and yelled at me. I had a Navy captain screaming at me, a GG-15, and I had the J2, a general, and I had them all screaming at me, from General Lloyd Austin, who was now the CENTCOM commander, who got yelled at by General Dempsey, who was chief of staff, because General Flynn had brought this up. And I was like telling them that this case has been going on for 4 years. So why is this all of a sudden news? A few days later, I had been told I was under investigation for pornography in my system, which is an IT or computer-based complaint. And I've done many investigations for CENTCOM under orders, just like an investigator would do for me, you know? And when I finally got to meet the investigator 2 months later, after being stuck in the CENTCOM parking lot and then sent to the gym to work, he advised me there were other charges about green notices I did to Interpol, which was legal, and other information about me communicating with foreign nationals, which by regulation we had to do because we had to sponsor them if they were interpreters in Iraq for us so that their families were safe and all this. Well, this went on for a total of 9 months. I did an IG complaint to the DOD. They shut it down. I did the court martial. I won my court martial by myself. Most of the witnesses were gone. Most of the information was gone. I proved the investigator was lying under oath under several things. He had broken into private emails. He had gone and created or manufactured a bunch of information, other stuff that he came up with about the information for the overseas communications and all was perfectly legal according to the Special Security Office. So everything was done. And after I was done with the court martial, the Army says I'm supposed to be able to go back to work. They denied me going to work. They wouldn't let me go. And then about a year later, I had done a Fox News interview. After the interview with Adam Housley told me he had met with General Flynn at some kind of dinner in DC. And then he asked General Flynn if he knew me 4 times, and General Flynn claimed he didn't. But on the 5th time, General Flynn had told him that, oh, isn't that the guy that did pornography and was a pedophile at CENTCOM, out of the clear blue. But at that time, General Flynn was under investigation for having adulterous affairs, which is a crime in the military, with a Russian female spy, having unlawful dealings with Ambassador Kislyak from Russia while he was active duty, and creating contracting agencies overseas. And then he also quit instead of getting fired by Obama so he could keep his contracting up. Then he started working in Turkey, and then he started doing interviews with Al Jazeera, which was all unlawful. So I had found out he was under investigation for many years and nobody had taken action. And I had found out later that General Flynn had his executive officer, Colonel Smith, communicating with the CENTCOM JAG office to keep tabs on me and to make sure I didn't sully his name. So he never tried to help me with this thing. He never tried to do anything to help me. And he had done this, and he's a coward and a liar, and I'll say it out loud. And he did this for his own benefit. He was even caught being in the Dominican Republic on vacation, getting his cell phone signals intercepted, knowingly talking open about classified matters. So this man should have been charged. And the reason you mentioned that President Trump pardoned him, in my opinion, is because Flynn wanted to fight his lying. He lied on his 302s to the FBI. Then he told the courts he didn't lie on them. So he was already caught for perjury. The reason President Trump pardoned him was to say that he did commit a crime. Because Flynn was a consummate Democrat, is against the Republican Party, and is one of these plants, or whatever you call them, rhinos, or I don't even know what they're called. But from my personal experience, that's what I went through with General Flynn. So I have personal knowledge that he lies to cover his own rear, and he doesn't really, care who he hurts in the process.
It's astounding. It's astounding. My God, it's like a movie, but it's real life and it's yours. It's what people need to hear. They need to understand the bigger, the firsthand witness of these things, and not just hear about it through a Telegram feed somewhere. They need to understand that the bigger picture of what's taken place, why those influences may be happening, and how the counter narrative is trying to cover that up. So why haven't we heard much from him lately? He was out there and everything was great, and then he sort of disappeared. What happened to him?
I don't know. He lives in Sarasota, just south of me, where I live in Florida, on a big ranch. I know his brother helped him create the digital soldier, and I know that took off. And QAnon, that was another thing that they created. But then, anybody that was normal, that was part of these groups, became, at least some of them, became disenfranchised with some of their messaging or whatever. I don't follow them, so I don't know. This is just what I've read and I've heard. But as far as he goes, he should be charged for crimes. It's ridiculous to think that you could be in New York City and someone breaks in, two people break into your house and they start shooting at you, trying to kill you and your wife and your kids, and you shoot them back and kill them. And the NYPD is going to arrest you and throw you in Rikers Island. It's ridiculous to think of that, or to think of the idea that if you fail to pay a speeding ticket somewhere in this country, that you have a bench warrant for your arrest and you got to go to court.
Yeah.
And here's General Flynn, who's done all this stuff wrong, and no charges. Nothing's there. I mean, in the military, when you commit adultery, you get Article 15, you lose rank at the very best. You lose rank, you get in all kinds of trouble. Why all of a sudden the double standards? What's going on with that? Not just in the military fields, but in the civilian arena as well. So he has this patterns of criminal behavior and conduct for his own personal benefit or gain, and he was caught and nothing happened to him. Even Trump pardoning him, he only pardoned him for a special portion of that. The rest of the charges should have come out. Why such a double standard? Why wouldn't he be charged?
Interesting. Well, we're going to see where this goes next. This is yet another astounding drop, and your efforts toward bringing the truth forward and warning the people are consistent. As I mentioned in my series, they're consistent and accurate. Now, to have you be heard, that's the next step, right? I mean, we see that Tucker Carlson got fired and he's moving on to somewhere maybe, but these kinds of voices that might bring forward your narrative are not bringing forward your narrative, and yet the State Department knows, everybody knows who you are and what you're filing. They're just trying to ignore it. So you were first on the scene regarding reaching out to Trump and looking for an investigation up in New York City at the time of the pandemic. You were first in line when Afghanistan withdrawal took place, and here you are again sounding the alarm bells and telling people, look, We need to take care of something here. We need to pay attention to the real chess game that's going on behind the scenes. So,
Well, I haven't just done, running my mouth. I mean, I've done these complaints with the IGs and with all the senators and congressmen I can, and the right agencies and the governors. Nobody responds, but they use it as talking points to help them get reelected. Where am I missing, this whole piece here, that they have a duty to do this, not just talk about it, but a real duty to do it. There's one congressman I dealt with that's a Republican. I'm not going to say his name. And it was about Afghanistan. And he sits on the Armed Services Committee. This is what kills me. Instead of sponsoring a bill to go back and get our people and our equipment out, he was taking donations from individuals to hire mercenary groups to go get one or two people out at a time.
yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. Far be it from me to say this, but your duty is on the, Armed Services Committee. You could sponsor a bill to get everybody la-di-da-di out, but you're taking time away from being a congressman to go and deal with, donors and mercenary groups to go over and pick out one or two people at a time. How does that help anybody? You're taking good people's money and you're making them go get one or two people at a time, probably because they're directly impacted. What about sponsoring a bill that says, let's get everybody? The law says you should do it. The law supports you putting the bill out. Why can't you? Where am I wrong in this?
I agree that there seems to be a big disconnect between some of the maneuvers that are going on, and I'll call them that specifically, maneuvers that distract. And so you are being very factual about the things that you witnessed, the things that you have known firsthand, and the things that you can share and alert the people to, but also calling forth in a very standardized manner the government saying, look at, this is unlawful and what you're doing is incorrect. But it's heard, but it's not seen. Do you know what I mean? It's not seen. So hopefully
just
people
trying to make them
hear
do their
this.
job.
Well, if all the veterans came forward and stood by you and said, hey, that's enough, and they called forward your work, I think that would be something. And so right now, and I'm not trying to go up against the US military, but how do you see the military in their conduct right now? What are they up against?
Well, I'd say the military is up against the most horrific examples of leadership they've ever been in. It's got to be the toughest time in the world for people in the service right now that try to do their duty and do their oath. And for veterans to see this, it's kind of the same. I mean, it's really, disheartening. I'm sure there's onesie and twosies across the board that are loving this, but the majority are just, they want to go do their duty and they just want to go home and they want to be, good soldiers and good stewards of the United States and good family members, or, be good individuals. It's got to be so difficult, it makes no sense how the military can denigrate their own regulations. Now, General Austin is a sec def, has the ability to write policy letters or other things, but he can't change the laws, which are in the military regulations. And there are some regulations that are being violated on a continuous basis. And I've called an IG complaint to one of those, which was in particular about one group of people, a category group of people being promoted, which is like a political venue. You can't sponsor political venues. And that's what they've done. And to do that is against regulations. It means that you're favoring this one group and saying, well, that's an exception to the policy, when reality is it's not. And so we have to really consider how the military is functioning today, how people are trying to stay strong. I'm sure NCOs are sticking their butts out there and trying to do the right thing as a majority. And I'm pretty sure that some of the officer corps sitting back, some of the senior officers that have been around for a while are pretty concerned about the way things are shaping up. But I think eventually we're going to get a handle on it. If like Fort Hood, Texas is an example of a compromise post where the generals just went in and they took their unit to war and came back and got their third star and moved out. Well, it's compromised because you have too much drug activity, too many weapons going off the base, too much involvement with foreign nationals, even at lower to middle ranks. And nobody's really investigated or cleaned that post up. That's where Vanessa Guillen was taken and killed. And then there's more to it than the soldier that was caught and his girlfriend, believe me. So, we're missing the boat on a lot of stuff, both domestically in the United States and abroad.
Well, it sounds like there's a cover up in our own functioning system to some degree. But there's a disconnect in where things are headed and what this administration is doing with the theater and how it's participating in the theater and where that leaves us as a country. So, William, I'd like to have you back at some point to kind of follow up on this. And if any of the quantum claimants want to step up to maybe assist him with his filing, please reach out to me here at Making Life Brighter. Sergeant William Kotel, he's retired, former military intelligence for the Army, and he was at CENTCOM at the time of Benghazi. We covered that. You can go back and listen to the shows on Making Life Brighter Radio and also here on YouTube. Any closing statements that you have that you want people to hear, William? Absolutely.
I'd like to close with this. I just want to say, regardless if you liked or didn't like what I said, every one of you out there have a voice. I highly suggest you take advantage of it. Don't feel stifled or like you're trapped or don't have any play or can't make an impact or a difference, because you can. You can do it through emails. You can do it through online websites. You can do it in person. You can do it in a variety of ways, writing letters, encouraging your friends and family to help you, and then let them help other people do the same over and over and over. It's all about numbers to convince and to change, current things that are going on. So don't feel negative about anything I've said. This is just all the bad news put out there, but there are a lot of good news stories out there as well. And everybody can make their own impact and difference, whether it's local, state, or federal. So I encourage you to do that, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here with us again and Making Life Brighter. And I do believe that people need to understand some of the backdrop, because you came from a very specific position within that backdrop and that theater at that time, and now you're basically saying it's replaying itself, and we need to pay attention. This is very important at this time that people hear what you have to say. This is critical right now. It's a warning to the world. So thank you for all of your hard work and for your consistency and for your patriotism for this country. William, we are very, very, very grateful that you've come and shared this with us and given more closure. So there you have it, folks. As you see, this is kind of unfolding, and I never intended this to, I just didn't intend the last few weeks to go the way they did, and it's happening naturally. It's really interesting to me. From Mark that we had on that was talking about filing things and not getting through and then taking the courts by storm. And here we have William and his filings and how important that is in the theater of what's happening. This is reality. It's not some conjecture out there. This is really happening, and you need to pay attention now. So thank you, Sergeant Kotel. Appreciate your time and all of your wisdom yet again. Thank you, and we'll have you back if you'll come.
Thank you so much. I'd love it.
Very good. All right, everybody, go jolly. Go make someone else's life brighter and stand for yourself. You're worth it.
One man is growing old and one man is being told that his land is not his own now. He has no place called home. He must learn to be and grow and find time to feed